Lactate threshold runs, tempo runs, VO2 max training. What does all this stuff mean? Let's talk about it and find out. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Running Otaku. I am the Running Otaku, and today let's talk about training terminology. What do the terms mean? What are their benefits to you as a runner? And how can you use them in your training? All right, so the terminology we're going to be discussing today has to do specifically with different levels of training intensity. For example, what's an easy run or a tempo run or a lactate threshold run? And there's a number of ways to describe these levels of intensity. Some people like to do it as a percent of their maximum heart rate. Other people do it by the percent of their VO2 max. But I prefer a third way, and that's by defining each of these levels as the maximum sustained pace you can hold for a certain duration. So let's take a closer look at that. So the first level of intensity is what I would call the very easy or recovery pace. And this is a pace that you could sustain for many hours of running. The next highest level of intensity is called endurance. And this is a pace that you could sustain for about 2 or 3 hours. It's probably just a little bit slower than your marathon pace. And it's a pace at which you can talk to people you're running with very conversationally in complete sentences, and you're not huffing and puffing. The next highest level is something that I would call tempo. And this is a pace that you could sustain for about an hour, maybe up to an hour and a half. So a little bit faster than marathon pace. Okay, so the next level up is the lactate threshold pace. And I define this as a pace you can hold for about 40 to 60 minutes. After lactate threshold, the next highest pace I would call high intensity. Now this is a pace you could only sustain for maybe 20 to 40 minutes. So if you're just starting out and running, perhaps this is equivalent to your 5K race pace effort. But if you've been running for many years, it's probably closer to your 10K pace. Above that is what's called the VO2 max pace. Now I'll describe that in just a minute, what the VO2 max means. But essentially, this is a pace that you could hold only for 7 to 10 minutes. And then finally, the most intense level, the anaerobic power. This is something that you could only sustain for a few seconds, so very intense, but very short. Okay, so we've defined all the levels of intensity. Now let's talk about what the benefits of running at each level is. So the easy recovery level is a pace which you would run perhaps the day after a hard workout. So let's say on Monday, you went to the track and ran really hard and you're tired on Tuesday. Instead of taking the day off, you can run at this level to promote recovery. It's what a lot of people call active recovery. Likewise, if you are on the track and you're doing a bunch of repeats, let's say 4 by 1 kilometer, in between each of those sets, you need to rest. And instead of just stopping and standing still, you could actually jog a little bit at this really easy pace to keep the blood flowing and to keep from getting stiff. The next level up has a couple of different benefits. The first of which is capillarization. Now, your muscles have capillaries in them which feed the muscles oxygen and nutrients. And so the more capillary density you have, the more nutrients you're capable of feeding the muscles. And it turns out that very well-trained athletes have about twice as much capillary density as those that are untrained. So if you continue training at this pace for long enough, you'll start developing this network, which will really help fuel your muscles. So by training at this level of intensity, what we're doing is we're teaching our body to be able to burn more fat relative to glycogen at ever increasing levels of intensity. And this is important because your body only has about 600 grams of glycogen, or around maybe 2,000, 2,500 calories of glycogen in the muscles and the liver combined. Whereas the average person has somewhere between 30 to 100,000 calories of fat stored. So we have a lot more fat. And if we keep training long enough at kind of these lower levels, little by little, we can start using that fat store as opposed to just using glycogen in our muscles. Okay, so the next level up is tempo running. And apparently this level of intensity can do a couple of things. The first thing it can do is increase the level of glycogen that's stored in your muscles. Now, I think I mentioned that our bodies on average store about 500 grams of glycogen, and about 400 of that is in the muscles and 100 grams of that is in the liver. but it turns out that very well-trained athletes can almost double the amount of glycogen that's stored in their muscles. Another interesting fact is that we have basically two types of muscles in our bodies. Type 1, which is slow twitch, which is what we use mostly for endurance type of activities. And then the other type of muscles is called type 2. And those are the fast twitch muscles that we would use for sprinting or lifting heavy weights or more explosive power. Well, it turns out that type 2 muscles can actually be broken down into two subcategories. Type 2A, with the fast twitch muscles, and type 2B, the very fast twitch muscles. So it turns out for distance running, we don't really use the type 2B very much at all. But we use type 2A a little bit. So for example, in an 800-meter run, maybe 25% of your energy is coming from the type 2A. And even at the 5K distance, maybe about 8% of your energy is coming from these type 2A muscles. So it turns out by training at this level of intensity, we can actually convert some of those type 2B fibers into type 2A. And this is really interesting. So we're taking these fibers that really we don't use much at all for endurance and converting them into the type 2A, which we use just a little bit. So it's a little bit of extra energy. Now, as far as I know from reading the literature, we still don't believe that you can convert the type 2 muscles into type 1. So the best we can do is the type 2B to the 2A, and this kind of tempo running will help with that. So the next level of intensity is the lactate threshold. And lactate is simply a byproduct of what happens when your body breaks down the glycogen to produce energy for the muscles. Now, at slow speeds, our body can clear that lactate through our bloodstream as quickly or even quicker than it can accumulate, so there's no problem. But as you start running faster and faster, you're burning more and more glycogen, and the levels of lactate in your body start increasing faster than your body can get rid of it. What happens is over time, once you start flooding your muscles with this lactate, you actually slow down. And so the purpose of doing lactate threshold runs is training at a certain level of intensity to basically train your body to be able to remove that lactate from your bloodstream as quickly as it's accumulating so you don't slow down. One note I wanted to make here, a lot of people hear the term lactic acid and they assume that that's that kind of burning sensation that they're feeling in their legs when they're running too hard for too long. It's actually not the case. So the burning sensation is not from the lactic acid, but nonetheless, that lactate does slow you down, and so removing it from your bloodstream is quite beneficial. So the next level up from lactate threshold is the high intensity. And among other things, this can help build up the heart even more and increase the stroke volume. So basically, each time your heart pumps, more blood is flowing through your body. So the next level of intensity is VO2 max. Now, VO2 max simply means the amount of oxygen, the maximum amount of oxygen your body can consume when you're using your muscles, right? So using your muscles turns out to be a lot like starting a fire. If you remember from way back when, you need three things to start a fire. You need a fuel source, so it could be gasoline, it could be wood. You need a heat source, like a match, and you need oxygen. So if there's no oxygen, the fire will go out, and that's the end of it. So it turns out our muscles are kind of similar that way. The fuel, as we discussed earlier, can come from the glycogen or from fat deposits. And you need the oxygen in order to fuel the muscles as well. So the higher your VO2 max level is, the more oxygen you can bring into your body, and the faster you can run, essentially. Now, by running at this level of intensity, you can actually increase your VO2 max. I think we probably all have a theoretical ceiling that we're just born with, a certain level that we can't surpass. But by training at this level, we can get closer and closer to that ceiling and become better runners. And then finally, we have the anaerobic power. Again, this is training that can only last for a few seconds. So really high intensity stuff, plyometrics, or short sprints. And it's used to build the muscles and build power. Okay, I don't have much muscles or much power, but if I were to train at this level, I would be bigger than I am today. Okay, so we've defined each of these levels, and we've talked about the benefits the next part of the discussion is, how do we train at each of these levels? What do we need to do in our training regimen to be smart about improving ourselves as runners? Okay, so if we start with the easy and recovery pace, again, this is the pace you would run at, for instance, the day after a very hard workout, or in between hard sets if you're running tempos on the road or perhaps intervals on the track. So this is just that recovery mode. Next, endurance. This is the pace you would run for long runs. So typically, runners on Saturday or Sunday will do a long run, and you would want to do most of that run at this kind of endurance level. Now, some runners who are training for marathons may do a progression whereby they start at this easy level, but the last, let's say, 20% of the workout of the long run, they'll run at a slightly faster pace. But nonetheless, this endurance pace is what you would use for your long, slow days. So the tempo pace is the pace you do for longer reps, let's say 20 to 30 minutes. Now, typically you would only do one of these, but some advanced runners might do 2, maybe even 3 sets of long tempo runs in one day. Okay, so the next level up is the lactate threshold pace. And for this kind of training, you want to do medium-long intervals, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, for a total of 30 to 40 minutes overall. And in between, you're doing an easy recovery jog of maybe a minute or 2, something like that. Even faster than the lactate threshold running is this high-intensity training. Now this, you're doing maybe 5 to 10 sets of pretty short intervals, so just 2 to 3 minutes. So it could be something like 800 meters on the track, something like that. And then we get to the VO2 max workouts. Now these are really short intervals of maybe 1 to 2 minutes, so maybe something equivalent of 1 lap on the track. And you'll do anywhere between 8 to 20 of them, depending on what level of fitness you have and what event you're training for. And then finally, the anaerobic power training. So this could be very short all-out sprints of 50, 60 meters. It could be very short sprints up a hill or really hard plyometric training. One word of caution here, especially for masters runners out there like myself. The higher you go up this ladder, the faster you run, the higher the chance for injury. So you've got to be very careful and really listen to your body as you start getting up into the kind of high intensity and VO2 max workouts. Smart training really boils down to one concept, and that is to maximize the results, how much you can improve, while minimizing the stimulus or the amount of training you have to do. So on one extreme, you could train super, super hard to try and improve quickly, but you're probably going to break down and get injured, take many months off, and then have to start all over again. On the other extreme, you could train very, very lightly, and you could probably do so forever, but you're not going to improve very much. So it's this really seesaw of trying to walk that fine line of getting just enough stimulus so that you can improve without adding too much stimulus so that you get injured. So when it comes down to it, there's 3 ways to increase the stimulus. 1 is to run faster, 2 is to run longer, and 3 is to take a shorter recovery between either hard workouts or even between hard reps in a workout. So for example, let's say in week 1, you've got 4 by 1K on the track at 4 minutes per interval with a 90-second rest. If you're able to complete that workout, the next time you do that workout, you want to increase the stimulus a little bit. And you can do that in 1 of 3 ways. You can increase the pace. So instead of doing each of those Ks at 4 minutes, maybe you do it at 3 minutes and 55 seconds. Or instead of doing 4 reps, the next week you do 5. Or perhaps instead of taking the 90-second rest, you take an 85-second rest. Any of these 3 things can increase the stimulus. But you need to be careful. I would suggest you only do 1 of those 3 on any given week. If you do 2 or all 3, you might be increasing the stimulus too much, and that will increase your risk for injury. So one final thought I wanted to leave you guys with, and that is that we are all individuals, right? Some of us perform better or will improve more with, let's say, increasing volume primarily. On the other hand, others of us can do better by increasing the intensity more dramatically. We're each different, and until we try things for ourselves, we don't really know exactly what the best benefit is. So I encourage each of you to try different things and see what works best. Now, what I'm really excited about is over time, the guesswork I think is going to be taken out to a large extent. And that's because we'll have much more sensors, things that can measure the lactate levels in our blood without having to prick our fingers, glycogen levels, oxygen levels. All of this will become much more readily available to us by just sticking stuff on our skin. And as we collect more and more data and we do some machine learning and some artificial intelligence, we'll start finding some really interesting correlations about what's the minimum amount of stimulus we can apply to get the maximum amount of return. So we'll be able to improve ourselves much more quickly while at the same time minimizing the risk of injury. Okay, so that's it for today. I really hope you liked what you saw and that you learned a little bit. If you did, go ahead and click the thumbs up. If you really liked it, then go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell right next to it too while you're at it. That way you'll be instantly notified every time I upload a new video. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.